My name is Sophia Polking. The title of my performance is Margaret Sanger, Making Motherhood a Choice. I hope you enjoy. All right, let's get started. Good morning, students. Welcome back to health class. Today we are starting a new unit. Last week we learned about contraceptive devices available to women. You know what that means? This week is a health history week. Woo! We'll be headed back in time to meet our latest historical figure. But first, a quick review. Does anyone remember any contraceptives? Maddie. Are you raising your hand or just stretching? Stretching? All right. Really? No one? Well, contraceptives are methods of birth control. Oh, there it is. I could practically see the light bulb switch on over your head, William. You all know what I mean when I say birth control. The woman we're about to study is who coined that term. Her name is Margaret Sanger. Yes, you should write that down. Every middle schooler today takes a health class, but in the 1910s, many people weren't educated on sex and puberty. In fact, it was illegal to teach people about contraceptives. Could you imagine if I could get arrested just for holding this class? Margaret Sanger risked scandal, danger, and imprisonment to challenge the legal and cultural obstacles that made controlling fertility difficult and illegal. So who's ready to hear her story? I was born in 1879. I was one of 11 children. We were a working class family, that is until my mother died. Her many pregnancies and multiple miscarriages led to her early death. After she died, my siblings and I lived in poverty. I sought out a better life, attending college to become a nurse. I married William Sanger, and we had 3 children. We moved to New York, and this is where my career as an activist truly began. I joined the Women's Committee of the New York Socialist Party, the Liberal Club, and was a supporter of the Industrial Workers of the World Union. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? What will you do for women's suffrage? Motivated by my mother's death, I longed to educate women on their bodies and give them the choice of motherhood. No woman can call herself free until she can choose consciously whether she will or will not be a mother. My goal did not come without its obstacles. Both socially and legally, we were opposed. The Comstock Act of 1873 prohibited the circulation of obscene and immoral materials. This included publications, devices, and medications related to contraception and abortion. It also made mailing and importing anything related to these topics a crime. I worked as a nurse on the Lower East Side in a poor immigrant neighborhood, and I treated many women who had undergone back alley abortions or tried to self-terminate their pregnancies. I strongly believed that the ability to control family size was crucial to ending the cycle of women's poverty. These women were suffering. This is why information and contraceptives needed to be available. Hence where my idea was born. I dreamt up a magic pill that could be used to control pregnancy and coined it birth control. The only issue, if I could make this dream into reality, it would be illegal. We were gonna have to take this one step at a time. In order to successfully oppose the law, I needed to gain public support. It's hard to gain support when it's illegal to put out information. To beat the law, I would have to defy the law. I started with What Every Girl Should Know, a newspaper column in 1912, teaching women about sex, menstruation, and their bodies. Next, a monthly magazine, The Woman Rebel, promoting a women's right to birth control. It was illegal to send out through mail, and I found myself facing legal repercussions. Rather than face a 20-year jail sentence, I packed up and moved to England, using the name Bertha Watson. I had friends distribute 100,000 copies of a pamphlet called Family Limitation soon after I left. While overseas, I continued my work and research. I returned to the US in 1915. After the charges against me were dropped, of course, I smuggled in some contraceptives called diaphragms and began touring the United States to promote birth control. In 1916, I opened the first birth control clinic in the United States. My staff and I were arrested in a raid within the first 9 days. But things started looking up. After serving 30 days in jail, I made an appeal. The court wouldn't overturn their verdict, but they did make an exception to the Comstock Act that would allow doctors to prescribe contraception to female patients for medical reasons. It was no upheaval, but it was progress. In 1921, I founded the American Birth Control League, which I served as president of for 7 years. Socially and culturally, we were making leeway. People were starting to hear us and listen. My organization managed to open the first legal birth control clinic in the United States, called the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau in Brooklyn, New York. I had undergone trials, raids, and harassment, but each time I won additional support for my organization and my cause. But the law still fought viciously. Legally, our progress had halted. So, in 1929, with the intent of advancing our cause through legal channels, I created the National Committee of Federal Legislation for Birth Control. The goal was to make it legal for doctors to freely distribute birth control devices. This faced resistance from the Catholic Church and, well, doctors. In the 30s, I opened a new clinic in Harlem. I was endorsed by the New York Urban League to help provide Black women with health and social services. The next huge legal success came in 1936, when the courts made it legal for doctors to prescribe birth control. This meant birth control was no longer considered obscene. I had done what I set out to do. I continued my efforts internationally. In 1942, I retired. I moved to Tucson, Arizona. But I remained a passionate advocate for birth control. My retirement didn't last long, however, and I worked on the birth control issue in Europe and Asia. In 1951, I met Gregory Pincus, a medical expert in human reproduction who was willing to take on the task of creating a contraceptive pill. I found sufficient funding and the project began. The next year, I established the International Planned Parenthood Federation. The final pieces of my plan fell into place in 1960, when the first oral contraceptive, Envoid, was approved by the Food and Drug Administration. I lived to see another milestone in reproductive rights in 1965, when the Supreme Court ruled that birth control would be legal for married couples in Griswold versus Connecticut. Margaret Sanger passed away a year later, after nearly 50 years of fighting for birth control and reproductive rights. She died knowing she had won the battle. Margaret Sanger's legacy lives on today. In remembrance of her efforts to advance women's rights in the birth control movement, numerous women's health clinics bear her names. And the Planned Parenthood continues to operate as a nonprofit organization providing sexual health care for women in the United States and globally. Fights on women's reproductive rights continue, most noticeably in the modern abortion argument, where people continue to preach a woman's right to her body and her choice. Today, 99% of women in the United States that are of childbearing age say that they have used a form of contraception. Without Margaret Sanger, it would be illegal and nearly impossible for women to obtain information and products related to birth control. She broke legal, social, and medical barriers to make motherhood a choice. Wow, how crazy is that? Does anyone have any comments or observations that they want to share with the class? I'll take it that just means you're all sitting there in shock.